guys last year about Kate Messner and her books, and about how much I admire her as a writer, and as a friend, and I'm so thrilled that she's here, to be with us today, because this is something I've wanted for a really, really long time. I know you're going to be awesome. She's awesome, and I just know you're going to love this presentation. The last one went really well. I know it'll go just as well with you guys. So I'm going to shut up. Here's my friend, Kate Messner.
Thank you. How are you guys this morning? Good. Good. I am so excited to be here too. I can't wait to talk with you about books. How many of you have read one of the books you see up on the screen there? Which one did you read? Anybody else read one of the Ranger in Time books? How about Capture the Flag? Any Capture the Flag readers? Any All the Answers readers? All right. We're going to talk today about how these books got to be books, but we're also going to talk about how an author gets to be an author. Because for me, that was a journey that started a super long time ago. I was like 7 or 8 years old in this picture you see. And I chose this picture not only because of my really cool one-piece pajamas there, but because that's how old I was when I wrote my very first book that I remember writing. Now, not a shiny published book like Ranger in Time or All the Answers. It was a book that I wrote on plain old notebook paper with a pencil. And it was a book about something that I was obsessed with when I was in 2nd grade. Anybody want to guess? What do you think? Huh? Time travel? What do you think? Barbies. Close. Sharks. No, I was obsessed with sharks when I was 7 and 8 years old. So I'd go to the library and I'd set out these huge piles of books about sharks. And I would read and read and read about hammerhead sharks and whale sharks and nurse sharks and sand sharks and tiger sharks and obviously great white sharks because they were the coolest of all. And then I thought, I've read all these shark books. Obviously, I am a shark expert now too, so I am going to write a shark book of my own. So I got some paper and a sharp pencil. I wrote down all of my favorite shark facts, and I was like, look, it's a book. And I made a cover for my book out of construction paper. I drew a shark on the cover. Gave it what I was pretty sure was the coolest book title of all time. I called it Shark, Terror of the Sea. And you had to read it like that too. And my mom put that book up on our refrigerator. So I was so proud of that book on the fridge that for probably a month after that, anytime I heard my parents might be having company for dinner, I would just stand there and wait for the doorbell to ring. And when the doorbell rang, I'd run to the door and say, hey, welcome to our house. Can I take your coat? Great. Now please come to the fridge right now and read my shark book. So that was my first kind of published book. It was how I learned that I loved not only writing stories, but when other people read those stories too. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And the funny thing is, that was 40 years ago. Not a lot has changed with me. I still love to read big piles of books about things when I'm interested in them. Still love writing stories, still think it's wicked cool when other people read my stories. And my books still start kind of the same way, with an idea, with that light bulb over your shoulder where you're like, whoa, wouldn't it be cool if I wrote about this? So I want to share some of my light bulb moments with you. One of them started several years ago when I scribbled an idea in my writer's notebook. You know what a writer's notebook is? Do you have writer's notebooks? What do you use your writer's notebooks for? Like, what do you put in there? You put personal narratives in there? Notes and things? Does somebody tell you what to put in there, or do you just write whatever you want there? Somebody tells you? Okay, so mine isn't quite like that, because I don't have a somebody to tell me what to put in there anymore. So my writer's notebook is for collecting things. It's for collecting funny things I see. If my daughter and her friends say something funny when I'm driving carpool, I collect it. You gotta be careful when your mom's a writer. I collect ideas. I collect funny things that people say. I collect beautiful things that people see, that I see. I collect ideas that make me curious. And I collect like feelings and stuff. So this is my right now writer's notebook. I don't like to be anywhere without a notebook, so if I travel, my writer's notebook comes with me. You probably notice it looks different from the one on the screen. That one actually I had to retire because it was full. Every single page of that notebook had an idea for a book on it. So this is my current notebook. So a few years ago, I had a day where I was worried about something. And I have to confess to you, that is a pretty average day in my world. I am one of those people who tends to be anxious, and I tend to worry about things that are out of my control more than is probably healthy. So it was a pretty regular day in my world. And I don't even remember now what it was I was worried about, but I remember how I felt. And I remember thinking, I need a magic pen. Because if I had a magic pen, here's how it would work. I would write down all of the questions that I'm worrying about and wondering about, and then I could get the answers magically delivered to me. That's how the pen would work. And I would never have to worry or wonder anymore ever, and my life would be awesome. That's it, I'm getting a magic pen. Great idea, right? Anybody see a problem? Yeah, right? I mean, it's not a real thing. I made it up. Which, of course, I realized right away that I couldn't have a magic pen. But I was like, you know, that's a pretty cool idea for a story, though, even though I can't have a real magic pen. So in my writer's notebook that day, I scribbled down 5 words. Magic pen, all the answers. 5 words. That's really all it takes to grab an idea out of the air and keep it so you can think about it and maybe write about it later. And then I went about the rest of my day. I'm sure I worked on whatever project I was working on, picked my kid up from school. But when it was time for me to start working on a new book, I was flipping through my notebook, looking for ideas, and I got to this page and I was like, whoa, I still really want that pen. And also, I still really like that idea. So this became the spark for a novel called All the Answers, about a 7th grader named Ava Anderson, who finds not a magic pen, but a magic pencil that will answer any question she writes with it. So some of my ideas come from just like things I'm feeling or thinking. One of my recent ideas came from something in the news, in current events. Breakout is a book of mine that you have not seen yet because it's not out yet. It comes out 2 weeks from tomorrow. And Breakout is the story of what happens in a small town when 2 inmates break out of the maximum security prison. And it launches this huge manhunt that changes the way 3 kids see their community and their neighbors. And so this book was actually inspired by a real-life prison break that happened in northern New York, where I live. 3 summers ago, 2 convicted murderers escaped from Clinton Correctional Facility, this maximum security prison that's 14 miles from my house. And we're like, oh, surely they'll catch them right away. They did not. The next day came, and they were still out there somewhere, and the next day. And soon we had 1,000 police officers from all over New York searching through the woods, walking shoulder to shoulder through the Adirondack Mountains, looking for these inmates. We had police helicopters circling over our house at night. It was really pretty scary. And as you know, I am one of those people who worries a lot, so this was a great thing to worry about. Like, this is a real deal. So I am also somebody who's very curious. And before I was a writer, I was a middle school teacher. And before that, I was actually a journalist. I was a TV news reporter. That was what I went to college for. And so I am still really interested in news and journalism. And when this was going on, I was kind of wishing that I was a reporter still covering the story. And then I realized I don't actually have the sort of job where I have to show up somewhere every day. So if I want to go pretend to be a reporter covering the story, I can do that, and I can just go see what's going on there. I can follow that curiosity. So that was what I did. I drove through the roadblocks to Dannemora, which is the town where the town is where this happened. And I saw all the streets that were blocked off because the search was happening. I saw the different officers getting ready to do searches in the woods. And I ended up parking myself. This is the prison, by the way. And the trucks you see are network TV satellite trucks. The whole street was lined with CBS and NBC and CNN. I parked myself at this little coffee shop and market across the street from the prison, and I just talked to people for a couple days. And the market was super busy. It was everybody in town was there. There would be police officers who came in covered in mud and ticks because they'd been out searching in the woods. There were neighbors of the prison who came in, and they talked about how scared their kids were about this prison break. There were people who had come to town to visit their relatives who were inmates at the prison, and learned that they weren't allowed to visit their loved ones because the whole prison was on lockdown, and they were afraid for how their loved ones might be treated on the inside while all this was going on. So I sat there and I talked to people for a few days, and I collected ideas, and somewhere around the 2nd day I had an idea for a book. And so that book would become Breakout. By the time the real-life prison break ended with the capture of the 2nd inmate 23 days after the escape, I was about 50 pages into writing Breakout. And it's a different book than anything else I've ever written. This book, instead of having a traditional storytelling structure, is written as a collection of documents. So the whole story is told in letters and text messages and photographs and recorded conversations and news articles and poems and comic strips and all different formats like that come together to tell the story. So I'm really excited about that one. So this was a story where I could do my research while this real-life prison break was going on, which was pretty unique. That's not always the case. Some of you I know have read some books in my Silver Jaguar Society Mystery Series. This is a series of 3 books about 3 kids who are in a secret society to protect the world's artifacts. And they go traveling all over the world to track down missing artifacts. In the first book, Capture the Flag, the kids are snowed in at a Washington, D.C. airport when they discover that the giant flag that inspired the Star-Spangled Banner has been stolen from the Smithsonian. And then they discover that the flag and the bad guys who took it are somewhere there at the airport, snowed in too. So they go racing all over the airport trying to track down this flag. This was a book that required a little more research because, I've never, been involved in a mystery like that. So my research process usually looks like this. I start in the library with paper books, and that's pretty much a constant for me. Then I go on the internet. I know a lot of people like to go to the internet first for research. I don't. I always like paper books first. Anybody have an idea why that might be? Anybody have a theory about that? What do you think? It's a case of what? Or in case I get the wrong facts from the internet? Is every single page on the internet reliable information? No. Exactly. And that's the cool thing about the internet, right? Is that anybody in the whole world can have a web page. How great is that? Except that anybody in the whole world can have a web page about anything, and they don't really need to know anything about it. And so if you're going to be using the internet for research, you really need to be able to sort the great, reliable information. And boy, is there a lot of it. We have so much great information on the internet that's been put there by universities and museums and scientists and historians. We need to be able to sort that great information from the not so reliable information. And I find that starting in the library with paper books helps me to do that. So I start with my books in the library, then I go to the internet, then I usually still have questions, so I make phone calls and take field trips. Here's what that looks like with a book like Capture the Flag. I'm going to start by reading about the real Star-Spangled Banner, the actual flag that flew over Baltimore's Fort McHenry in 1814 during the Battle of Baltimore. That is the flag that Francis Scott Key supposedly saw from his prison ship in Baltimore Harbor that inspired him to write the words to our national anthem. Then, I'm going to figure out how that flag is being cared for now. Where is it? Well, it's at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. And I'm going to read on the website about how it's been preserved, how it's being displayed. And I actually thought I was ready to start writing my book at this point. So I finished my reading, my research, and I got to my computer and I wrote Chapter 1. Now I wanted to start with a chapter that felt very much like National Treasure. Did you guys see that movie? You see the movie National Treasure? Oh, go see the movie National Treasure. It's a good movie. Anyway, I wanted to start with a chapter where you, the reader, could see the heist happening. You saw how the bad guys stole the flag, even though you didn't know who the bad guys were yet. You got to see how they pulled off the heist. So I sat down to write that chapter, and I'm like, all right, this is going to be so great, Chapter 1. And then I got stuck. Has that ever happened to you as a writer? Yeah. So I was like, oh, it's going to be so cool, and I could almost see it in my head. But every time I sat down to write that chapter, it came out really crummy. And it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, and I got so frustrated. And finally, I figured out what the problem was. I know as a writer that really great writing has lots of vivid details, right? Your teachers talk about that sometimes? How good writing has details and descriptions and language that appeals to all 5 senses. And I knew I wanted to write this scene that way, except I had a problem. I had never stolen a flag, so I didn't really know how that would go. So guess what I did? No, what kind of person do you think I am? I didn't steal the flag. I did research. I called up the Smithsonian Museum of American History, and I asked to speak with the curator of the Star-Spangled Banner exhibit. So he got on the phone, he said, hello, Jeff Brody here. I said, hey, Mr. Brody, my name is Kate Messner. I'm a children's author. I'm writing a series with Scholastic. It's going to be super cool because in every book, a different amazing artifact is going to be stolen. And you're not going to believe this, but the very first thing that gets stolen in the very first book is your flag. He was not as excited about this as I hoped he would be. He said, really? And I said, yes. And so I was hoping that you might be willing to talk with me and give me some ideas for how I might write that first scene. Like, if somebody wanted to steal your flag, like, how would they go about breaking into the museum and doing that? This conversation did not go well. So Mr. Brody came back, he said, what was your name again? I said, it's Kate Messner. He said, Miss Messner, I am very sorry we are not going to be able to assist you with this request. Here at the Smithsonian, we take security very seriously. We consider ourselves to be the personal caretakers of 300,000 priceless artifacts that tell the story of our great nation, and we are not able to share information or have discussions about how people might go about stealing our stuff. I was like, yeah, but can we just talk about this a little? Because I think you could really help. He said, no. He said, also, what you're describing is impossible. How's that for a starting point? Because our flag, I don't know if you've been to the museum yet, have you seen the exhibit? I hadn't. He said, our flag has its own room at the Smithsonian. The walls of that room are made of bulletproof glass, the walls are made of steel, and the display is bulletproof glass. It's a foot thick. The only way to get into that room is through a hidden double door. And to open the first door, you have to have a high security clearance key card. The door slides open, you step inside, then the door slides closed behind you and locks. In order to open the second door, you have to provide biometric information, a fingerprint scan or a retina scan of your eye. And if you don't have the right fingerprints, both doors stay locked and you're trapped in a little steel cage until the police arrive. So it's not the kind of room somebody can break into. I'm really sorry about your book. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I was like, can we just talk about this a little more? I was like, because I really think there must be some way somebody could break in there. And I think if we just talked about it a little more. He said, look, I understand you're disappointed. I think it would help you to see what you're talking about. Do you want to come down to the museum and have a behind-the-scenes tour? I said, yeah, that would be great. He said, you're going to see that what you're describing is impossible. Please understand that. But I'm happy to give you a tour. Do you have kids? I said, yes. He said, bring them if you want. It'll be fun. I said, okay. So my family flew to Washington, D.C. We went to the Smithsonian. We went to the museum. Mr. Brody met us. He was very, very nice. If a little bit braggy about all his security, he was like, look, steel walls, bulletproof glass. I was like, yeah, whatever. And then I said, okay, I still think there must be somebody, some way, somebody could break into that room if they really put their mind to it. He said, I'm sorry, I know you came a long way, I know you want this to work. It's impossible. The only way somebody could get into that room is if they were invited. And I said, well, great, like that's gonna happen. And then he said, huh. And I said, huh, what? And he said, well, I was just thinking. I said that, and then I remembered that once in a great while, we do tours that go inside the flag chamber. If somebody's made a very big donation, I've never been a fan of this policy, but we do it. We give these VIP tours that go into the flag room. And I suppose if you were on one of those VIP tours and you managed to somehow stay behind when the rest of your group left, maybe you could hide under a back corner of the flag table, well then after everybody else was gone, you would have access to the flag. And I started to get excited, and then I remembered all the security. I was like, well, that's not going to work, because then you wouldn't have the right fingerprint or card to get out the door, right? And he said, actually, no, that wouldn't be a problem at all, because all that security is just designed to keep people out of the room. If you're already in the room, you can just walk through those doors like there are any other doors. And I said, really? Let's talk about this some more. So I got my writer's notebook out and I started taking notes. I'm like, okay, this is good. So you're hiding under the back corner of the flag table. Everybody else is gone. Okay, is that flag attached to the table in any way? He said, yes. There are 64 metal clamps that would need to be unscrewed. So I write down, unscrew 64 metal clamps. Now, here's the next problem. The flag is humongous. It's about the size of like this group of you sitting on the side of the room right here. So even if you folded it up very, very carefully, it would still be really big. It would just barely fit in one of those enormous cafeteria garbage cans that they put out at lunchtime. So it's not like you can stuff the flag in your pocket or shove it in your backpack. And it's not like you can go walking out the front door of the Smithsonian with the flag, right? Over your shoulder. Hey, where are you going with our flag? What flag? I don't see any flag, right? That's totally not going to work out. And so I was like, is there a back door to this museum? Mr. Brody said, no, our primary entrance is just the main one off. Oh, I have an idea, come with me. And he takes off, running out of that flag room. I look at my husband and my kids, I'm like, follow him. So we run out of the flag room, we chase him, he runs down this hallway, around a statue of George Washington on a horse, down another hallway, up to a freight elevator. He takes a card from his pocket, puts it into a slot, and a cage opens on the freight elevator. He's like, come on, get the cage. I'm like, okay, kids in the cage. So we get in the cage closes, and the elevator descends to the basement of the Smithsonian Museum of American History. When that cage opens again, it opens on this sort of shadowy hallway, and there are caterers pushing carts with white tablecloths piled with dirty dessert dishes. They're cleaning up from a party the night before. And then there are other people moving musical instruments around, including these two guys with big rectangular black cases. And I said, what's in there? And Mr. Brody said, that's probably a large speaker case, but it's a good size case, isn't it? You could hide a flag in there, couldn't you? And I said, yes, you could. So I wrote that down. I'm like, all right, where's this back door you're talking about? So he runs down another hallway, and halfway down the hall, the entire wall opens up to a loading dock. Now, I gotta stop here for a second and remind you that this is the same guy who told me in his very strict voice on the telephone that he was very sorry he was not going to be able to assist me with my request because we take security so very seriously. And now, the guy is totally excited because he's figured out how to steal his own flag. He says, this is the key to everything. They can add the flag in his speaker case. They can drive a van up to this loading dock. Then they can load the flag into the van and go out that driveway. That driveway goes out to the street and they can disappear into the night. So I wrote all that down. I was like, all right. So one more question. There's got to be security at this loading dock, right? Is there security here? He says, actually, yes, it's that guy. He points. There is an old man in a glass booth reading a book. So I was like, all right, I wrote that down. I'm like, there we go. I think I have figured out chapter 1. So sometimes taking a field trip really helps the plot come together for me. And that was the case for the second book in this series too. Hide and Seek is set in the rainforest of Costa Rica. Same kids trying to recover this time this gold cup known as the Jaguar Cup. That's an ancient emblem of the Silver Jaguar Society. I knew that when I wrote this book and set it in Costa Rica, I wanted there to be cool chase scenes through the jungle of Costa Rica. And so I spent a week in Costa Rica doing research so that I could encounter some of the animals that the kids might encounter when they were in the rainforest being chased around by bad guys. So we spent a week in the rainforest, met a lot of the friendly residents, some of the less friendly residents as well. That's a venomous snake called a fer de lance, by the way. It was right in the middle of the trail when we were hiking. He found his way into the book. And so did the toucans. And so did the leafcutter ants. And so did the poison dart frogs. And all these animals, every time I learned about a new animal in Costa Rica, it gave me a different idea for the story. And so all those stories came together in Hide and Seek. The third book in the series is called Manhunt. This one is set in Paris. And not just in Paris, also under Paris. I don't know if you know this, but the streets of Paris are, the city of Paris is riddled with tunnels. Because in the early days, when they were building the great buildings and the big cathedrals like Notre Dame, they were mining limestone from under the city. And it left all these open tunnels. And then in the 1800s, Paris's cemeteries were super overcrowded. They were out of space in the cemeteries. There was no room to bury any more dead people, and people didn't stop dying just because the cemeteries were full. So the city of Paris came up with a solution. They said, we will move the remains. We will move some of these bones out of the cemeteries to make room for more bodies, and we will move these bones into this space we have hanging around in the tunnels under the city. So they ended up moving the remains of 6 million people into some of these tunnels under the city. Now, today, the city is still riddled with tunnels. Some of those tunnels, most of them in fact, are completely off limits. They're caving in, they're dangerous, and you can't go down there. But there is one area where you can actually go down and explore the tunnels under the streets of Paris. You go down a spiral staircase. It's like 200 or 300 steps. And the lower you go, the colder it gets. By the time you get to the bottom, it's like 20 degrees colder than it is at street level. And it gets kind of dark and pretty damp too. Sometimes stuff drips from the ceiling. And the ceilings are low, and the walls are also very close together. The hallways are very narrow. So if you're walking through this hallway, it's pretty quiet, and you're walking along, and there are places where it's so narrow that you could actually reach out and touch the stone wall on both sides of you. And then if you look really carefully at that stone wall, you might notice that the stones are shaped kind of funny. And the reason for that is, it's not a stone wall. It's a bone wall. So this entire wall, you see how the stones have sort of that C shape? That's because you're looking at the ends of a whole bunch of leg bones. This entire wall is made of femurs. Your femur is the long bone that goes from your knee to your hip. And other walls in this area, known as the Paris catacombs, are made of other kinds of bones. So, super, super creepy place, right? But also, what a perfect place to set a mystery. So I went down there for a day with my notebook and my camera, and I collected all kinds of details for Manhunt. I also do a lot of research for the Ranger and Time series that I know you're familiar with. So this series is about a time-traveling rescue dog who's been trained to track missing people by following their scent. And he digs up this old magic first aid kit from the family garden so he can time travel. What luck. He can go anywhere in history where people can use his help. And so I had to do some research for this series too. A few different kinds of research. Anybody know can you really think about what kinds of things would I need to research to write this series about a time-traveling search and rescue dog? What do you think, right in the back here? What? Okay, so the Oregon Trail, in the case of the first book, right? I'm going to have to research the setting for every book. What else? World War II, the setting for the 7th book in the series. So in addition to all those historical settings, there's other research too that I'm going to have to do. What do you think? Sure, for every time period, there's a whole set of everyday details that I have to know. What kinds of names existed in 1850 when the Oregon Trail happened? Not the same names that exist now in many cases, and certainly not the same names that were around in ancient Rome when a different book is set. So all the details of everyday life. What kind of actions took place in that time period? But there's one thing I had to research that applies to every book, no matter the time period. Different dangers. What are you going to say? The history of the book. Ranger, right? How does a search and rescue dog do his job? And that was actually where I started my research for this series. I read a lot of books, and I also spent time with real-life search and rescue dogs. This guy is named Easton, and Easton is a dog with the Champlain Valley Canine Search and Rescue Unit where I live. Easton has been trained to track missing people by following their scent. How many of you have a sport or a hobby you like a lot, or play a musical instrument? What do you have to do to stay good at it? Practice, right? What do you suppose a search and rescue dog has to do to stay good at finding missing people? Practice. How do you practice finding a missing person when nobody's missing? What? Somebody has to hide and pretend to be missing, right? So the Champlain Valley Canine Search and Rescue Unit invited me to be the missing person for one of their training sessions. So they said, all right, the first thing we need to do is you need to get to know Easton. Easton needs to know what you smell like. Now, if you were really missing, Kate, we wouldn't have you here to smell, but we would find something. We would find a sweater or a scarf that belongs to you, and Easton could smell that. Since you're here, though, Easton could just smell you, so get down and love him up for a little while. So that was what I did first. Job one, love Easton. So I said, Easton, it's so good to meet you. How are you? Who's a good dog? Who's a good dog? And I got all up in Easton's face so Easton could smell me. And they said, okay, we think he knows what you smell like now. Now, we're going to take Easton and hide him behind this old pickup truck. We're going to take him behind the truck so he can't see where you're going. We need you to wander around that field for a little while as if you're lost and confused, and then end up hiding in the woods. And they said, let me just get this right. You're going to stand here and watch while I wander around the field and pretend to be confused. They said, yes. I said, great, that won't be awkward at all. So I did. I wandered around the field. I was like, oh, wish I knew where I was. I'm so lost, really, really lost. And then I found an old dead tree, and I crouched down, and I hid behind the old dead tree. And I could still hear what was going on out of the street, and I could hear Easton barking behind the pickup truck. He was getting super excited to get to work. And I also could hear his handlers when they let him go. They said, are you ready, Easton? Are you ready? Go on, boy, Easton, go on, find her now, Easton, find her, Easton, find her. That command, find, is the command that search and rescue dogs are taught. It's the command that means, hey, that thing that you smell, go get it now. So I was still peeking out from behind my tree, and I could see Easton take off into that field. And I saw when he picked up my scent because he stopped. And he circled around a little bit. And then he took off and he went everywhere in that field I had been. And it was not long at all before he came bounding up to that old dead tree where I was hiding and said, "Woo, I found you." At least that's what I imagined him saying. And then I had one more job. His handlers had said, by the way, when he finds you, it's really important that you reinforce his behavior and give him his reward. I said, that's no problem. What, do you have a dog treat or something? They said, actually, no. We don't use food as a reward for search and rescue dogs, because food only works as a reward if the dog is hungry. So instead, we use something that dogs love all of the time, love and praise. So when Easton finds you, love him and praise him and tell him how great he is. I said, okay, great. So Easton comes up, he goes, "Woo, I found you." And I said, "Easton, woohoo! Good job, what a good job you did! Who's the smartest dog ever?" And Easton said, "Me, that would be me." And so it was really, really fun for me to see how these dogs do their work and also how excited they get about doing their work. So step one of my research was pretty much done. Step two was researching the different time periods. And as you know, the first book is set during the days of the Oregon Trail in the 1840s and 50s and 60s, at a time when a lot of people in America were traveling west by covered wagon to move out west for different reasons. Some were going to California for the gold rush, some were Mormons who were moving out to Salt Lake City for religious freedom, and some were farmers who were looking for better farmland in the Oregon Territory. Oh, what's your name? Aiden. Did you guys hear what Aiden said? Aiden said another thing you have to research is how people in all these different time periods reacted to dogs. So let me keep that thought, and I'm going to talk about it more as I go through the different books, okay? So, in the days of the Oregon Trail, did people have dogs as pets in the 1840s and 50s? Yep, they did. They had, especially farms, they had a lot of farmhounds. Some people couldn't take their dogs when they traveled west, a lot of people, and so they had to leave their pets behind. And so in the first book, Sam is actually missing his dog when he comes across Ranger. So researching this book, I did a lot of reading, and I also visited the National Frontier Trails Museum in Independence, Missouri. This is a museum that's all about the Oregon Trail. They have real covered wagons and a replica trading post where you can see what it would have been like to get all your supplies ready for the Oregon Trail. They also have a library. It's a specialized research library, which means it's a whole library with books just about the Oregon Trail, including lots of published books, but also handwritten diaries from pioneers. Handwritten diaries that have never been published. This one was written by a 16-year-old girl named Lizzie Carlton. And Lizzie actually hated the Oregon Trail. Lizzie did not write the sort of great details that writers like to find when they open a diary. Lizzie spent her entire diary complaining. Her entries went like this: June 6th, went 17 miles today, we'll probably do same tomorrow if we don't all freeze to death first. That's all you get from Lizzie on June 6th. She was not a happy camper. But that gave me a great sense for what the Oregon Trail was really like for kids. Anybody here read the first book in this series, Rescue on the Oregon Trail? Okay, so if you had, you might notice that one of the characters, the main character's older sister, is a teenager named Lizzie, and that she has a habit of complaining all the time. And so that Lizzie, I borrowed from the Lizzie that I met in the pages of this diary. So the research for this series is very different depending on what time period I'm working on. The second book is set in ancient Rome. So we go from the Oregon Trail in 1850 to ancient Rome in the year 90. Do you suppose we have paper diaries hanging around from the year 90? We do not. We do not. We don't have those diaries, we don't have the letters, we certainly don't have people alive who were around in ancient Rome. But what we do have is archaeology. See this building on the cover of this book? That's the ancient Roman Colosseum. It was the big building in the middle of town where the gladiators would fight in front of the emperor and the crowds. That building is still standing in the middle of the modern city of Rome with a whole bunch of bars and pizza places across the street. And you can tour the ancient Roman Colosseum now. You can go through with a historian, you can walk through the very same gates that the gladiators walked through when they were going in to fight for the emperor. I spent a day there with my notebook with a historian asking lots and lots of questions, seeing all the different parts of the building. And I also spent a day in Pompeii when I was working on this book. Pompeii, many of you might know, is a city that was buried by the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in ancient times. And this ancient Roman city stayed buried for hundreds and hundreds of years until archaeologists finally uncovered it. When they did, it was so well preserved they felt like they'd uncovered a time capsule. So you can walk around the ancient city of Pompeii today and walk on the same stepping stones where the people of ancient Rome walked. You can see the public baths where they would go to exercise and socialize and get clean. You can even see the cubbies where they would put their stuff when they went to take a bath. So your ancient Roman lockers right there. And the counters where they would serve soup at lunchtime. Really, really interesting to see all those details and a great glimpse into what everyday life was like. The third book in this series, Long Road to Freedom, is a story about two enslaved children who escaped from a tobacco plantation in Maryland. And here's an example of what Aiden was talking about, where I need to think about the role of dogs, right? This is an Underground Railroad story. This is about two kids who escaped from slavery. Were there dogs on plantations? There were. And were all of those dogs friendly to the enslaved people on plantations? No, some of them were bloodhounds that were sent out by the enslavers to catch people who would have escaped, right? So are these kids gonna feel trusting of Ranger at first? Probably not, right? And those are all the historical details that I need to think about with the perception of dogs in different time periods in history. For this book, the kids start out in Maryland. I actually found a real tobacco plantation in Maryland to use as a model for the Bradley plantation. So I visited this plantation, the Mount Harmon plantation, which is a museum now. Got to see what the house was like, how they grow tobacco, how they packed it in barrels. From there, the story goes to Philadelphia. I toured this church, which had a secret tunnel in the basement where they supposedly would help people who were hiding from slave hunters. I visited the home of William Still, who was an abolitionist in Philadelphia in the 1800s. An abolitionist is somebody in that time period who knew that slavery was wrong, even though the government still said it was fine. So abolitionists broke the law because they understood that the government hadn't caught up yet with what was right. So they would help people who had escaped from slavery to get to the next place so they could eventually be free. From there, the story goes to Vermont and another family of abolitionists who ran this farm in a place called Ferrisburg, Vermont. They would actually employ people who had run away from slavery on their sheep farm here. Then the story crosses Lake Champlain and ends up in this barn very close to my house and also close to Canada, which was where a person who had escaped from slavery really needed to get to be free after the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. This barn has a hidden room in the back where historians believe they hid people who had escaped from slavery as they were finding their way north to Canada. The fourth book in this series, Race to the South Pole, is the only one that I did not travel for a couple reasons. One is it's super time-consuming to go to the South Pole today, also super expensive, and if you did go, your experience would be nothing like the experience of the explorers who are in this story. That's a good thing. The explorers got frostbite and most of them died, right? Nobody wants to go through that for research. So for this book, I relied on journals and diaries a lot. This book is set in the early 1900s, so again, we have diaries. We also have some photographs in this time period. I had this journal from Captain Robert Falcon Scott, who was the captain of the Terra Nova, one of the ships that was involved in this literal race to see who could be the first explorer to get to the South Pole. And also one of his crew members kept a diary, Absolute Cherry Garrard. Look at the title of his autobiography. Suppose he had a good time on that trip? Not so much. He called his autobiography The Worst Journey in the World. The fifth book in the series, Journey Through Ash and Smoke, is set in Viking Age Iceland. So this book is set in the year 934. Do we have paper diaries hanging around from the Vikings? No. We don't. We don't have letters. They actually didn't even have a written language until around the year 1000 when Christian missionaries came to Iceland and brought that language. So again, we rely on archaeology. So I went to Iceland for a week. I got to see the remains of some Viking Age longhouses. And even more important for this story is I got to explore the landscape of Iceland. Iceland is a land with a lot of geothermal activity, so they have these really cool like hot springs and lava caves from where lava cooled. So you can go down and like walk through these caves, and I knew I would want to set a scene in the story in these really cool lava caves. Every time I travel for research, there are things that I'm expecting to find and questions that I'm hoping to get answered. And then there's also always at least one surprise. Something I never expected to see. In Iceland, that surprise came when I was hiking on an old lava field with my family, and we saw this tiny Arctic fox pup walking across the lava field. And then I got down with my camera to take a picture, and he came trotting up to my phone. He was so curious, and I absolutely fell in love. Look at that guy. Isn't that the cutest thing ever? No, I did not pet it. It's a wild animal. I wanted to, but I didn't. I just loved it from afar. So this fox pup is so cute. What do you suppose you do when you're a writer and you fall in love with an Arctic fox pup on your research trip? Yeah, you put him in the book. So if you see the cover of the 5th Ranger in Time book, you'll notice that Ranger has a cute furry little sidekick. And this is the Arctic fox pup they named Funi in the story, who's based on this guy that we met in Iceland. The 6th book in this series, Escape from the Great Earthquake, is set in 1906. So let me ask you about research. As a researcher, what am I going to have to work with in the year 1906? Will I have diaries and letters? I will. Has photography been invented? It has. Are there lots of people alive who were alive in 1906? No, so I'm not going to be able to do personal interviews. So when I was working on this book, I went to California for a week. I spent time in San Francisco's Chinatown, where the story is set, interviewed experts at the Chinese Historical Society of America, and also spent a couple days at the California Historical Society, which is another specialized research library all about California history. And they have tons and tons of photographs and scrapbooks and letters from the days of the California earthquake. So I got to see all these photographs of the days immediately following the earthquake, when fire was spreading through the city and people were trying to flee with their stuff. They were trying to save their possessions from the fire that they knew was on the way. All these different settings. I use the photographs when I'm writing. So if I'm writing a scene set here at Mechanics Pavilion, which had been turned into a hospital, I'm going to have this photograph up on my wall, and I'm going to be writing and looking up at the photo to grab details from the photograph. I love writing with photos. So all those photographs helped, and then of course I had letters too. First-person accounts of what happened to people as they were fleeing from the earthquake. I noticed a really weird thing. When I was reading all these letters, people were describing what it was like as they were trying to get out of San Francisco as the fire spread, and they were describing what everybody was carrying. So I'd read letter after letter that went, as we were leaving, we saw a man pushing his sofa up a hill on roller skates. On the sofa, he had 3 suitcases and a canary bird in a cage. As we were fleeing the fire, we saw a woman lugging 2 suitcases and a canary bird in a cage. We saw people carrying their bedclothes over their shoulders in bundles. And in the other hand, that man had a canary bird in a cage. Does anything strike you as weird? What's up with the canaries, right? Letter after letter after letter. I'm like, what is going on with these canaries? And so finally, I got to this letter. I'm reading, and I've spent 2 days in this library now, and I have a note by the side of me that says, what's up with the canaries? And I keep reading, and finally I get to a letter that says this. One man was pushing a wheelbarrow full of flat irons. A woman was pulling a child's wagon with a dress form on it. Since we have become refugees, we have seen hundreds of people with canary birds in cages. I read this, I'm like, yeah, me too. A man told us today that Robinson's Pet Shop had just received a large shipment of canary birds, and rather than let them perish in the fire, they had given them to the passers-by who would take them. All of those people I read about in all of those letters were rescuing canaries from a pet store that was about to be engulfed in the flames. And I was like, that is so interesting. So I found a historical map, and I'm looking and I'm like, please let this pet shop be where my character has to go in the story so she can save a canary too. And guess what? It was. So in Escape from the Great Earthquake, Lily gets to be one of the people who saves one of the canaries. All right, D-Day, Battle on the Beach. This is the book that you read. Yay! And this was an amazing book to research too. As you know, this is about the D-Day invasion, the invasion when Allied forces, American and Canadian and English forces, crossed the English Channel and came ashore at Omaha Beach, among other locations, but this story is set on Omaha Beach. And it features 2 main characters, a Jewish boy from Paris who's hiding in a Normandy farmhouse, and also an American serviceman named Walt, who is part of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. So what year is it in this book? It's 1944. Do I have diaries and letters to work with as a researcher? Do I have photographs?
Yes.
Do I have video?
No. Wait. Oh.
Tiny bit of video, very, very little. Do I have people alive who were alive then?
Yes.
Not a ton, but a few. So I can do some interviews. So I'm going to find real life photographs of the real members of the Barrage Balloon Battalion. Not only did I use these in my writing, but Kelly McMorris, the illustrator for the series, used them in her art too to make sure she depicted the barrage balloons the right way. This is a picture of the beaches of Normandy, of Omaha Beach, during the D-Day invasion. Here's what that same beach looked like a few summers ago when I visited for research. Amazingly different place. And it's interesting, I was touring Normandy with a historian, a woman who used to work at a World War II museum and now gives private tours in the area. And she gives a lot of tours to elderly men who were in the D-Day invasion, who helped with the invasion, who were servicemen then. And I asked her, I said, what happens when you have somebody who came ashore when the beach looked like this, and then they show up with you and they see people having picnics and playing frisbee and running around laughing? You know, are they upset that people aren't being more respectful? She said, no. She said, I was here with a gentleman last year who was part of the 1st Infantry Unit, who was among the first ashore on D-Day, who took all that gunfire from the Germans. And she said, does it bother you to see, you know, because there were kids laughing and running around, and there it was, this beach where he had come ashore and risked his life and watched so many of his fellow soldiers die. She said, does it bother you to see it this way? He said, no. He said, this is why we came ashore, so that people could do this. And I thought that was just amazing. So you see this beach, and it's a regular beach, but then you walk up the hill just a little bit, and there are still bunkers. And there are German machine gun nests and so many signs of what happened. It was just an amazing place to do research for this book. And of course, there's also an American cemetery in Normandy. 3 members of the Barrage Balloon Battalion are buried here, and our guide took us to visit them and pay our respects too. You mentioned 1944, we do still have people alive who were around when the D-Day invasion happened. One of them is the woman in the middle in this picture. Her name is Jeannette Legalois. And she lives in Normandy, in Saint-Laurent-sur-la-Mer, which is a village just over the hill from Omaha Beach. She was 15 years old on D-Day, and she remembers when the Allied soldiers came marching into her village on the morning of the invasion. She remembers chasing the trucks with the other kids, because sometimes the soldiers would give them gum. And she remembers running out with flowers to say thank you. And so I got to interview her. I spent a few hours in her kitchen. She invited me into her house to have tea and talk about what happened. My historian who was touring acted as his translator because my French was not quite good enough to keep up with her. But that was amazing to talk with her about her stories. And she remembered about the days when the Nazis were occupying her town in France. And her family had a farm, and she remembered how every week they had to give liters of milk to the Nazis. And it was milk they needed for their family, but they would come and demand this milk every week. And she told me how her brothers, before they handed over the milk to the Nazis, would put their fingers in it to put germs in it, so that they would give it to them. It was that tiny act of resistance. But just the amazing story she had, it was just incredible. So when you're talking about a time period and there are still people alive who can tell your stories, that adds a whole element to the research. And that was the case with the new book that's coming out in June as well. Hurricane Katrina Rescue. This book is set in 2005. So when Hurricane Katrina came ashore in the southeast, it devastated the city of New Orleans, and one neighborhood in particular, the Lower Ninth Ward, where this story is set. 2005, do I have letters and journals to work with as a researcher? Do I have photographs?
Yes.
Do I have video?
Yes.
Lots and lots of interviews and news reports and video of what actually happened. Do I have people alive who lived through that? Right. And so I have all these resources as a researcher. This book comes out at the end of June. And then Disaster on the Titanic comes out in January. That's a Titanic story. And then the 10th book in this series, which is the last one that I know for sure there's going to be, is an American Revolution story. It's set on December 25th, 1776, which is the night that George Washington and his troops crossed the Delaware River to invade Trenton during the Battle of Trenton. So that's book 10. All right, I talked a ton about research because it's like my favorite thing about the writing process, but my other favorite thing about writing is revising. Do you love to revise your writing? Do you revise your writing sometimes?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Does this happen sometimes? You do a piece of writing, you turn it into your teacher writes some suggestions and comments on it for how you might make it better, and then you take it back and you start over. and you write a new draft. Does that happen? How many times do you usually do that for a piece of writing? 2, 3? Okay. Guess how many times I usually rewrite a book, like even a short chapter book. This one I didn't revise as many times as I revise longer books. 6, 10.
14.
Yeah, those of you who can see the preview screen. 14. So think about that for a second. Think about finishing a piece of writing and being like, yeah, I wrote a whole book, and then starting over and writing it again. And doing that 13 more times. That's how long it took for this book to be good enough and funny enough for kids to read. And that's pretty typical. Most of my drafts, by books that are published, if you read one, you're reading anywhere from draft 12 to 22. When I'm working on a book, it looks nothing like the book in your library. It looks like this. I'm making lots and lots of comments and notes to myself on the pages, getting rid of whole chapters sometimes, reorganizing, rewriting. I also work with an editor at a publisher for every book I work on. An editor's a little like a teacher, right? I turn in work to my editor, she makes comments on it, gives it back, I do it over, right? And we go back and forth, often 4 or 5 times. She makes lots of notes on the pages too. This is one of my novels. Which one is this? What is that book? Oh, this is Capture the Flag. When I was working on Capture the Flag. And there are notes from my editor on every single page. I think you can make this better, try to make this better, make more description here. Can you make this clearer, rewrite this part? After I've gone back and forth with my editor, usually 5 or 6 times, we move on to the stage in the process called copy edits. That's where we check for grammar and spelling and punctuation, which is important too. And then finally, at the end of that process, you have a book that you can read. So we have 5 or 10 minutes left for your questions. What else would you like to know about the books I talked about, or the research process, or books I didn't talk about that you wish I had, or about being a writer as a career? What can I talk to you about? 2 quick rules for Q&A. If you're the person asking the question, I can't really get to everybody with the mic, so please be super loud if you're asking the question. And if you're not the person asking the question, that one person I call on, please don't talk at all so we can hear, okay? Yes? What gave me the idea for the Ranger in Time book? So, I live on Lake Champlain, which is a really historic lake where a bunch of Revolutionary War battles have happened, and I can actually see the site of one of those Revolutionary War battles from my kitchen window. I have always quietly wished that I could time travel, so that I could see what, just for a few minutes, like I don't want to be in the battle, I would be terrible at that, but I would just like to go back for a few minutes to see what it was like when that was happening. And so I had tried to write several time travel books with people time traveling as the main characters. They never worked out, they were crummy, and they never got published because they weren't good enough. And so I thought, oh, maybe someday I'll try another time travel book. Literally, I woke up one morning, you know sometimes you wake up in the morning and you don't get up right away because the covers, you know, are all cozy and everything. And so I was just kind of daydreaming and thinking, and I was thinking, you know, I should try another time travel book someday. What if I tried a time travel book, and instead of having a person be the main character, I could have a dog. And maybe it could be one of those search and rescue dogs who can find missing people and help people, because that would totally be useful in lots of different times in history. And so I had my notebook by my bed, and I grabbed it, and I wrote down, time traveling rescue dog, question mark. And that was where the scribble that launched the Ranger in Time series later on. Yes? What inspired me to do the Seventh Wish? So the Seventh Wish is a fairy tale retelling. It is about a girl, you know the old fairy tale about the guy who catches a fish and the fish offers him wishes in return for freedom? And then he wishes, and the wishes are all greedy, and then his life is a mess, and he wishes he never wished at all. It's a wishes gone wrong story. The Seventh Wish is a retelling of that old fairy tale, but the main character is a 7th grader who's an Irish dancer, and she's ice fishing to raise money for her first solo dress for Irish dance when she catches this fish that offers her a wish in return for freedom. So like the guy in the old fairy tale, she makes wishes that go wrong all the time. Hers go really hilariously wrong at first. But then there's a more serious issue that comes up with her family in the middle of all this, where her older sister, who's away at college, they discover has become addicted to drugs. And she's in real trouble. And so they have a family crisis going on, and the main character kind of has to figure out that there are things that can't be fixed by wishing. So the spark for that story was, first of all, living on Lake Champlain and seeing ice fishermen, and also these kind of magical looking ice formations. Every once in a while, the first time Lake Champlain freezes every year, there are these ice flowers that show up. And it doesn't even happen every time. But there are these cool ice formations that I've always thought seemed magical that got me thinking about the lake and ice fishing and magic. And then the other inspiration for the family crisis was the headlines. I mean, you can't read any newspaper today without reading about the heroin epidemic in America. And I've been thinking about that because I visit schools all over the country. And all of those communities are touched by that. So almost everybody knows somebody who's died of an overdose. And it's something we don't talk about with kids because it's scary. And we're like, oh, we should talk about that with kids. But so many kids are living through it because they have loved ones or lost loved ones or have loved ones struggling that I wanted to write about that so people who are in it know that they're not alone. Yes. Out of all the Ranger and Tom books, which one's my favorite? I'm not supposed to choose favorites. Like, it's a little like asking a parent to choose a favorite kid. Like, I'm supposed to love them all equally. I am kind of partial to D-Day because I love that there are two main characters, and also because the research trip I took for that book was so amazing. Like, talking to that woman in her kitchen about the day the Allied forces freed her town from the Nazis was just like incredible. So I'm a little partial to that one. How about somebody over here, right in the back corner? Say that again? Did I interview your grandfather? I don't think so. Where does he live? No, did he fight in World War II? Wow. Have you gotten to talk with him about that? I hope so. And have you written things down and written a story? That's so important. When I mean, think about some of the things that your grandparents have lived through. I'm a big believer in hearing those stories and collecting those stories and keeping them, because we won't always have those people to tell them. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, I bet she's heard some of those stories, right? That's amazing. Yes? A little louder? When did I come up with what? So all the answers was the one where I had that idea that I wanted a magic pen, and then I ended up giving the character a magic pencil. And when did I come up with it? I think that book was published in 2015 or 14, which means I came up with it in 2011 or 2012, probably. Yep, how about right here in the black sweatshirt? Do I ever what? I'm not sure, would I ever cross them? What do you mean? Oh, like have a mashup? Oh, that would be weird, wouldn't it? That has never occurred to me, but it probably will now. No, it's not anything I've thought about. It'd be kind of interesting, though. Who has not asked a question and would like to? Probably take just a couple more. Yeah. Is Ranger based off any real dog? A lot of kids say, is Ranger your dog? And I say, I wish. Like, how cool would it be not only to have a great golden retriever like that, but also like a dog that could time travel? No, I actually can't have dogs because I have really bad allergies, and so does everybody in my house. But Ranger is very much inspired by those real-life search and rescue dogs that I met, like Easton, and then there was another one, a German Shepherd named Oakland, that I worked with a lot too, and Ranger was really inspired by that. Yes? Why did I choose D-Day? I choose topics for the Ranger in Time series for there are two reasons, and those two reasons have to work together. First of all, it has to be a topic that I'm excited enough about to spend all that time researching, right? And there have been topics that Scholastic has suggested where I've been like, yeah, I'm not really that into ninjas, so no. But if I'm interested in it and I can spend time on it and Scholastic thinks that kids and teachers will like it, that's how the ideas get chosen. Who else is not? Yeah, right here. Are the people that I write about real people? So in the Ranger in Time series, the main characters are always fictional, which means they're made up. But there's real history in those series, and so there are real historical people in some of the books. So for example, in the D-Day book, that order from General Eisenhower that Walt has in his pocket that Ranger ends up with, that is the real order that the men were given that day, and that also was read on the radio from General Eisenhower. So he obviously is real. animated. So there are real people, but typically not the main characters. We are out of time, friends. I'm so sorry. I would hang out with you all day and answer more questions if I could. But you'll be excited about what comes next too, I think.
Guys, look at Kate here. So you guys have been reading Ranger Time. We had a little trivia contest going, and we asked a question this morning about what did Walt give to Ranger, and we're going to give away. Kate talked about her new book coming out. This isn't even out yet, but she brought us a copy, right? We're going to give this one, and Hornell Trail, and Escape from the Great Earthquake to the Earthquake Podcast. So, if you would please, my friend. Nobody has the right answer on it.
All right. Let's see what we got here. This says, Walt gives Ranger the letter from General Eisenhower. That is correct, and the winner is Kayla Briggs in Mrs. Thompson's class.
If you brought your book and you would like it signed, okay, I am going to ask you to, without a lot of hustle and bustle, go up the stairs and come across the stage. Kate's going to sit over here. She'll sign all your books for you, okay?